Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here, and you know what? It's kind of a special day today, because today it's officially December 31st, the final day of 2023, and that means that I finally get a chance to actually upload a video of a list that I've been working on throughout the entire year, basically, and that is the top 50 best albums of 2023. That's right, objectively the best. My opinion is not even remotely a part of this, and if you think otherwise, you're wrong, and also, I don't like you. Okay, I'm sorry. I like you. You're cool. In all seriousness, though, it is officially time for me to start doing my final year-end lists for the entirety of 2023. So without further ado, here are my top 50 albums of 2023. 50. Kesha, Gag Order. Seeing Kesha's evolution from throwaway early 2010s pop star to one of the most interesting pop musicians that we've seen rise throughout the entirety of the century so far has been really lovely, and the fact that such intense, interesting experimental art has to come from a place of extreme pain for her, it's a shame, but I'm glad that she is at least somewhat in a place where she is able to do better at this point, and Gag Order is a fantastic example of her really just stretching her legs in terms of the huge amount of artistic risks that she takes here, the vast majority of which pay off with not only some great song structures and choruses, but some absolutely baffling influences from a variety of genres that, had you told someone Kesha would partake in a decade ago, you would have gotten laughed at and potentially beaten up by a large gang of pretty much normal people. Gag Order is just a really great record, and I'm glad that Kesha's still making music. 49. Colin Stetson, When We Were That What Wept for the Sea. If you bring up the question of who is the greatest modern composer of avant-garde and minimalistic music, Colin Stetson is rightfully one of the first names that many people who are aware of that entire realm of music will mention, and records like When We Were That What Wept for the Sea show exactly why. It's just a beautiful, ever-evolving, and ever-changing record that manages to, at the same time, stay rooted in some bass sounds. It's so massive and mysterious, yet at the same time it's very subtle and manages to kind of have this very ground-level, casual feel to it. It's rare that you can actually come across an album that so simultaneously manages to feel monolithic and very small at the same time. It's a really intriguing record. It's beautiful, and I highly recommend it if you have quite a while to spare, at least a good couple hours. And for clarification, yes, I know this album's only like an hour and a half long. You need the other 30 to 40 minutes to just kind of take it in emotionally, just for clarification. There's a lot to embrace here. 48. Ryuichi Sakamoto, 12. The final record from legendary composer Ryuichi Sakamoto before his tragic passing earlier this year, and it's a really stunning meditation on existence via ambient soundscapes. I can't really say too terribly much about it other than that. I feel like this is the kind of record that you need a good bit of context to truly appreciate, both in terms of his sickness leading up to his passing, as well as his legacy within realms of electronic and otherwise texture-based music. But as a whole, it's just a really phenomenal ambient record, and I'm glad that we got one last thing before one of the greatest legends of electronic and, again, ambient music passed on. He really is one of a kind, and I don't really think that you're going to get another figure like Ryuichi Sakamoto again, at least not anytime soon. 47. Chris Farren, Doom Singer. Maybe I just really have a soft spot for this kind of highly infectious, melodic power pop kind of sound, but I think that Doom Singer is one of the best pop rock records that you can get your hands on this year. I mean, songs like Cosmic Leash, come on, just those choruses are so striking, Farren's vocals are absolutely lovely, and his songwriting is just the right amount of dorky. Great record and highly recommended. 46. Khanate, To Be Cruel. Beloved avant-garde drone metal band Khanate's return to music for the first time since 2009 with To Be Cruel this year was a really beautiful thing to see, especially considering it came quite literally out of nowhere and suddenly popped into existence, even though I don't think anybody was expecting a Khanate reappearance anytime soon. But hey, I'm certainly not complaining. This is a disturbing, dissonant, destructive, devastating album. You know, all the D's that describe the great metal of the year, generally speaking, at least. So I can firmly say that, to be cruel, it's an intense listening experience, and it's draining in the best way possible. Just totally atmospheric, totally uncomfortable, and totally the best kind of return that any sort of metal band can ever have. 45. Daniel Caesar, Never Enough. One of the standout albums in R&B this year, Daniel Caesar's Never Enough at number 45. Just a really great all R&B record with a lot of really strong instrumental tones. Daniel's voice is absolutely phenomenal, and some of the more tongue-in-cheek moments here, like Homosexual, despite the fact that they feel like they shouldn't work on paper, actually work out really well. And if I'm being totally honest, this album has only continued to grow on me since I first heard it months ago. Just a really fantastic, lovely, melodic, and generally speaking, lush, enjoyable record. 44. Rebecca Black, Let Her Burn. Rebecca Black further distancing herself from her kind of shitposty, meme-worthy origins with Friday back when she was a young kid by putting out one of the best experimental pop albums of the entire year, as she embraces a lot of somewhat harsher sounds, especially within the semi-realm of hyperpop, and I honestly love to see it. It really reaches the right distance between a lot of more aggressive and abrasive sounds and the more traditional melodic electropop sounds that she is very much well equipped to release music with. As a whole, I just think this is a really successful album, and it's cool to see Rebecca finally getting some actual credit from the larger music critic community after years of unfortunately being a laughingstock due to something that happened when she was literally a small young child. 43. Spelling and the Mystery School. I'm normally not a huge fan of albums made for the sole purpose of re-recording an artist's older material, especially not when that material is pretty recent in the case of Spelling. But this record, Spelling and the Mystery School, where Spelling and her new live band re-record different tracks throughout the different records that she's put out up to this point, is extremely impressive. I mean, virtually every single song here, for the most part at least, sounds way better than the original, with that classic live in studio sort of feel. Tracks like Cherry, as well as Walk Up to Your House, sound phenomenal, and even some of the more grand songs that she's put out within more recent years, such as Boys at School, just sound phenomenal in this live in the studio setting. I think that this is just an excellent album that proves how eclectic her catalog is up to this point, while still maintaining a sort of groundedness to the same art, pop, and theatrical tendencies, as well as how she's able to just completely remold her work in a way that I think few other artists would be able to achieve on their own. This is just a really impressive record, and I'm excited to see what she does next. This may not be a through-and-through album of new material at all, but hey, it's a pretty good stepping stone into whatever she chooses to do into the future with her new live band. 42. Lana Del Rey, Did You Know That There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard? Considering Lana seems to get significantly better with each passing release, if you take out some more underwhelming output from her recently, like Chemtrails Over the Country Club, it seems really impressive that this record even exists, as this is arguably her best album to date, even better than Norman fucking Rockwell a few years back. I mean, the songwriting here is phenomenal, it's such a heartfelt record, and honestly, any issues that I may have had with it at first when I initially reviewed it months ago have since gone away. I mean, this isn't my favorite album of the year, as you can tell by the number 42 placing, but at the same time, it's an absolutely fantastic record. Her, again, songwriting, excellent. A&W is deservedly considered by many to be one of the best songs of the year. Her vocals, fantastic. The compositions here are simultaneously powerful and sweeping while still maintaining a lot of laid-back and subtle kind of qualities that add to the re-listenability of them. Everything here just works out really well, and I'm glad to see that Lana is at this point in her career where she's capable of putting out such artistically impressive pieces of work like this. 41. Jessie Ware, That Feels Good. Few artists within pop music right now have such consistently good vibes as Jessie Ware does, at least musically, I should say. This record's just pure energy. It's purely infectious. The disco vibes, the lush instrumentals, her non-stop release of her super charismatic personality. Everything here is just fantastic, and if you're looking for a record that you can either really sink your teeth into and appreciate all of the complexities of the wonderful production or her great vocal performances, or you just want some like very sugary mind candy to listen to and dance to, this is perfect for both. 40. Squid. Oh Monolith. Oh Monolith is the perfect building up of their debut album Bright Green Field, in that it takes all of the best qualities of their first LP, all of the crazy antics going on vocally, as well as a lot of the high energy but still complex jazz-influenced instrumentals in terms of composition, while also ditching some of the more negative qualities of their debut album, the bloated runtime, or the unnecessarily long songs that occasionally overstayed their welcome. Everything about Oh Monolith is just perfectly in the right place here. I mean, the instrumentals are great, the vocals are great, everything is great. I don't really have a ton to say about it otherwise, other than I think out of all of the bands of the current windmill scene, quote-unquote, not with the word black in their name, Squid kind of killing it right now, more than anyone else. Sorry guys, you still gotta compete with Black Country New Road and Black Midi, but I mean, hey, this is a pretty good first step into greatness, not gonna lie. 39. Jesus Peace. So Unknown. If you want some metalcore with real emphasis on the hardcore part of metalcore, then this is your album. Just pure, raw burst of energy. Short runtime, short songs, perfect everything. Just absolute violence concentrated in musical form. And you know what? That's just about all you need for a great metalcore record, and Jesus Peace know that, and that's exactly what they put forth. Damn good album. 38. Hannah Diamond. Perfect Picture. This is far and away one of the most uplifting pop albums of the entire year, and it's really nice to see Hannah continue to just grow as an artist, considering only a couple of years ago she seemed like someone with a lot of squandered potential, but you know, like here with Perfect Picture, it really feels like she's finally coming into her own and creating an album that is just so touching and heartfelt, yet at the same time positive and so easy to absorb as just generally good vibes. This album is so emotional and life-affirming, and personally, I absolutely love it. 37. Drain. Living Proof. Not only is this album living proof that Drain is a really great band, but it's also living proof that crossover thrash as a genre is still very relevant. That being said, I don't think there's any crossover thrash band doing it quite like Drain is at the moment. I mean, this album is just great, it's anthemic, and even their cover of The Descendants' Good Good Things, the original being one of my favorite songs of all time, has actually really grown on me, I'm not gonna lie. I think that Drain have a lot of potential to be one of, if not the greatest crossover thrash band of this generation of the genre, and I'm excited to see what they do next, because this is already amazing. 36. Pupil Slicer. Blossom. Just pure violence and aggression here with Blossom by Pupil Slicer at number 36. Just such an insane mathcore record, so technical, so relentless, and so unashamedly itself, and I absolutely love the themes of self-loathing and identity being found throughout this record. It's a powerful album that just so happens to be conveyed in the most violent way possible, and for that, I love it. 35. Phoxjaw. Notverynicecream. Phoxjaw are one of the most interesting post-hardcore bands out there right now, exclusively because it's almost hard to define them as post-hardcore. I mean, yeah, they're post-hardcore, but they're also a straightforward alternative rock band, but then they're also kind of a punk band sometimes, but then they're also sort of a noise rock band at times as well, but then they're also kind of a metal band at the same time. You get my point. They're a lot of things all at once, and that culminates in a record like Notverynicecream, which is filled with a plethora of intriguing influences, phenomenal vocal work, guitar work that is just so odd and left field, yet at the same time structured in a traditional manner that it almost feels oxymoronic, just like the album itself. It's just a really fantastic record that I can't really describe or really kind of do justice just via words, so I highly recommend checking this out if any of the genres I just mentioned even remotely interest you. 34. Queens of the Stone Age. In Times New Roman. At number 34, you got Queens of the Stone Age and Times New Roman, and just an absolutely phenomenal record from them. Probably their best in a while, and by a while, I mean only 2 albums ago with Like Clockwork, but the spacing between the records is so huge that, honestly, it's been a good while. And yeah, just a really phenomenal record from them. A lot of really chill, laid-back cuts on here. At the same time, there's a lot of immediacy in some of those harder and generally more aggressive songs. Yeah, as a whole, I would say that this record is at least somewhat on par with records from their quote-unquote golden age, with records like Rated R, for example. 33. Carly Rae Jepsen, The Loveliest Time. Despite the fact that I thought her previous album, The Loneliest Time, was good, yet still a slight disappointment compared to the now fairly iconic Emotion, The Loveliest Time manages to completely recapture everything that made Carly Rae special on Emotion in the first place. Just such an energetic, positive, lovable personality, instrumentals that are even somewhat futuristic at times in how current they feel, how fresh they feel, and the songs themselves range from really upbeat party kind of tracks to some of the more low-key and some of the more kind of emotional or at the very least personal driven kind of songs here, the highlights being tracks like Collage, for example. Yeah, as a whole, this is just another really amazing record from Carly Rae Jepsen, continuing to prove why she's sort of the alternative queen of pop at the moment. 32. Foo Fighters, But Here We Are. I never thought I would be saying in the year 2023 that the Foo Fighters recently dropped their best album, and I especially never thought I would be saying that in the context of a massive tragedy with the still fairly recent passing of longtime Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins, which largely inspired many different moments on this record. And I gotta say, this album is just so unprecedented in both the worst and best ways. Worst in coming from a place of absolute shocking tragedy that kind of shook up the musical world in, again, the passing of Hawkins, but in the best way in that this is the Foo Fighters at an emotional level that they haven't touched in decades. I mean, not since songs like Everlong have we seen Dave Grohl and company be so genuine, and never before at all have we ever seen them be so ambitious here, with songs like The Teacher going directly into progressive rock territory at times. This is just an incredibly impressive album, and it's a shame that it had to come from such a dark place, but that doesn't make it any less of a stunning record. 31. Nas, Magic 3. Magic 3 is a great way for Nas to really put a perfect bow on the Magic trilogy now that both that and the King's Disease trilogy are over with, and this sort of resuscitation of his career and relevance within greatest of all time discussions has occurred. I mean, really, it's nice to see. The guy is a legend for a reason, even with a fairly spotty discography to say the least, and albums like Magic 3 prove why he is still considered to be one of the greatest of all time. I mean, the guy's still doing his thing. His flow is amazing. His lyrics are outright striking at times with just how confident he is. And Magic 3 almost feels like a perfectly reflective album for him at this point in his career. And I really am excited to see what he does next, because it almost seems like there's nowhere to go but up, almost. I mean, that's not to say this album's bad, but just the pure positive trajectory he's had going for 6 albums now. I would like to think that the next step would just to be continuing greatness, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. And as it stands, Magic 3 is a fantastic record to put Nas on a pedestal in the year 2023. 30. Billy Woods and Kenny Segal, Maps. This was Billy Woods' year, basically, in terms of hype alone. I mean, between this and the Arm & Hammer record, We Buy Diabetic Test Strips, guy had a huge year. But that being said, I think the best thing he put out through the entirety of 2023 was none other than this Kenny Segal collaboration, Maps, which was arguably the biggest deal out of any project he was involved in this year, and I mean, rightfully so. The instrumentals here are phenomenal. Woods' unique lyrical and delivery style that manages to be sort of odd and off-kilter, yet at the same time never totally abstract, is something that never fails to impress me, and features from people like Aesop Rock on this record are just excellent. Really an album with no major flaws to it. 29. Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit, Weathervanes. One of the undeniable highlights in country music as a whole this year came in the form of Jason Isbell and the 400 Units' Weathervanes, and that's kind of crazy to say considering this is the year where country kind of became a mainstream genre again after being pretty dormant within the mainstream conscience for quite some time. And you know what? All your Zach Bryans and whatnot, they are great. Amazing even, don't get me wrong. And screw your Morgan Wallens and Jason Aldeans, obviously. But Jason Isbell has been an absolute veteran of the country music scene at this point, and it really does show on Weathervanes, which delivers some of his best songwriting since he put out his solo effort Elephant, which is now a devastating classic in its own right. I mean, tracks here like Cast Iron Skillet, King of Oklahoma, etc. It's also deeply personal. They tell beautiful narratives. The characters within these stories, be they Isbell himself or these sort of personas that he takes on, are also immediately engageable. It's basically a flawless album in its own right. It doesn't really have any particular weak spots, and the instrumentation from the 400 unit backing up Isbell is phenomenal as well. Just a really great country album that proves that Jason Isbell in the current new wave of country music, if you will, is just as relevant as ever. 28. Aesop Rock, Integrated Tech Solutions. Aesop Rock has been doing his thing on hip-hop's underground for decades at this point, and this record's more of the same, but that's kind of a good thing. At least it's more of the same from Aesop himself. His flow and cryptic lyrical style is just as intense and just as unique as he has ever made it. The instrumentals here play around with a variety of different sounds that we either haven't seen from him in a while or just haven't seen from him at all before, especially tracks like the single Mindful Solutionism, with plays around with this sort of industrial, semi-industrial, electro-industrial maybe kind of tone and vibe. And the loose sort of concept here, despite not being the absolute best, it still manages to kind of connect every song together to truly make this feel like a through and through listening experience. It's just a pretty much amazing album from one of the best rappers in the history of underground music. I mean, the guy's still killing it, and my favorite album by him came out over 20 years ago now, so do with that information what you will. But I will say this, Integrated Tech Solutions, don't sleep on it, it's pretty phenomenal. 27. Blut aus Nord, Disharmonium Nahab. The latest effort from the French experimental avant-garde black metal / whatever metal you really want to consider them collective, Blut aus Nord, is absolutely insane, as you would expect it to. It's apocalyptic, and the album cover of these ginormous, looming Lovecraftian figures basically sums up the record. It's just so... it's terrifying. It's probably the most terrifying album I heard this year. That's saying a lot, too. I mean, it's just insane. It's just a purely visceral, heavy, destructive, insert synonym for very large here record. And if that's something that you personally find a lot of passion for, like myself, I highly recommend it. It is far and away one of the best metal albums of the year. Speaking of fantastic black metal, as well as highlights in metal for 2023, we have here at number 26, Thantifaxath, Hive Mind Narcosis. Hive Mind Narcosis is a really exhilarating record to me, especially coming from a band like Thantifaxath, who are one of the premier black metal bands out there at the moment. I mean, it's such a impressive, grand record in terms of scope, with a lot of really complex and massive sounding instrumentals, yet at the same time it maintains that sort of classic rawness that made much less complex classic black metal albums like Dark Throne's Transylvanian Hunger such classics in the first place. It's the perfect understanding of why visceral emotion is the core of black metal, as well as how one can expand upon that so that you don't sound like you're a Norwegian recording in your basement in the 1980s. It's a really impressive record. Hive Mind Narcosis, one of the best black metal albums I've heard in a while, and I'm really interested to see what Thantifaxath pull off next, because I can't really see how they would top this, but I mean, hey, I would love to be proven wrong. I hope I'm proven wrong. 25. AJJ, Disposable Everything. HAJ have always been a band that I felt is extremely close to greatness, but has never quite gotten there for me. Most of their records leaving me with, at the very least, one or two complaints that have kind of prevented me from truly adoring at least one album by them. Even their classics, like People Who Can Eat People, are the luckiest people in the world. So for this year, I was kind of surprised when they dropped Disposable Everything, and I loved it to the point that I can now confidently say it is my favorite HAJ album, and arguably their best to date. I mean, obviously, best versus my favorite is basically the same thing because everything is subjective in one form or another, but at the same time, I really do feel like this album is a culmination of all of the best qualities of HAJ. Their early folk punkishness, a lot of their more self-aware lyrics, a lot of their more nihilistic tendencies that are kind of counteracted by that self-aware tongue-in-cheek kind of tone, the more traditional indie rock instrumentation that they've picked up throughout the 2010s going into the 2020s, so on and so forth. I really do feel like this is their best, most consistent, and generally most impressive record to date. Just a really phenomenal album coming here from HAJ. 24. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Petrodragonic Apocalypse. Yes, I know that the alternate title is longer than that, and I technically should include it, but I don't want to. One of the two entirely separate records that King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Australian rock favorites, put out this year, this being a thrash metal record, somewhat similar to their 2019 thrash effort Infest the Rat's Nest. However, where this album differs from its thrash predecessor is that I feel as if this album, Petrodragonic Apocalypse, is so much more aggressive, it's so much more raw, and it's so much more reliant in a good way on apocalyptic themes. It really does feel like they are heavily embracing this sort of industrial apocalypse vibe and reflecting it in their music without actually utilizing any industrial metal influences and banking entirely on the entire idea of thrash metal here. And beyond that, the vocals are outstanding, the guitar riffs are phenomenal, every single song has amazing structure from the solos to a lot of the build-ups, and I mean, call me a bit of a King Gizzard fan here, but I genuinely do think that this is one of their best attempts at heavier music in general to date. 23. Swans, The Beggar. I kind of discussed this record in the December Rapid Record recap when I quickly went over some albums throughout the year that I didn't get a chance to do full videos about, and this is the one album from that video that I thought about just straight up doing a full review on, because I felt like I had so much to say, and then I sat down and tried to write my thoughts, and I realized that I didn't really have any thoughts per se as I did emotional devastation. This is being potentially the final Swans record is such a tragic thought to me for such a legendary band, but such a positive thought for me knowing that such a legendary band could go out on such a positive note. It just feels like a great combination of the variety of different sounds that have defined their best eras, in my opinion. Gothic, neo-folk, and heavily apocalyptic no-wave, as well as this giant piece that comes at the end of the album, this giant swirling sound collage, noise-based, texture-based piece. It all just feels very Swans, but in the best way possible, resulting in a record that is undeniably theirs and undeniably heavy, to say the least. 22. Kara Jackson, Why Does the Earth Give Us People to Love? This is undoubtedly, in my eyes at least, one of the best singer-songwriter type albums of the entire year. I mean, from a lyrical standpoint alone, this record is absolutely astounding, and the acclaimed poet status that Jackson had before even going into music with this record is certainly something that is made very obvious by songwriting that is simultaneously very easy to appreciate from a casual standpoint, and very easy to analyze and digest from a more critical standpoint. Her lyricism here is absolutely stunning and deeply personal, coming from a very striking point of view. She constantly makes things to be very intriguing. She's just an interesting figure in terms of singer-songwriters right now. But even from a non-lyrical standpoint, this album is phenomenal. Her vocals are stunning. The compositions here are outright magical at times. This is just an amazing debut for an artist that I think nobody really saw coming, and now I can honestly say that she's one of the most promising musicians on the planet right now. 21. Tomb Mold, The Enduring Spirit. Technical death metal as a genre of music, just like any other more progressive side of any genre of music, can be a very finicky kind of thing. It's very easy for bands to get lost in themselves and focus on instrumentation and composition above anything else, thus resulting in a technically impressive but otherwise uninteresting album. Mold do the opposite of that, except they actually keep the technical ability. They are a wildly impressive band from a musical standpoint, but what really sells the Enduring Spirit as a record is just the sheer ferocity of it all. I mean, this is just such a powerful, punchy album, and all of the strange, distorted, somewhat sci-fi themes being found here, it all just makes for something that's disorienting thematically, and that isn't to mention the addition of odd time signatures that would make bands like Voivod just sort of shrivel up, at least based on their modern forms, at least. My point is, Mold, weird, strange, out there metal band, but also rightfully one of the most hyped up death metal bands in the world right now. And The Enduring Spirit is one of the best metal albums of the entirety of 2023. I would say somewhat inarguably. It kind of seems like that's the general consensus. And I mean, hey, the consensus is right sometimes. 20. Fever Ray, Radical Romantics. I really love how Fever Ray only pops up once every 6 to 8 years to actually put out a solo album, but when they do, it's immediately one of the most impressive and stunning experimental albums that you'll hear of the entirety of that year. I kind of admire that quality in an artist. This record is a heavy lean into synth pop, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, and that certainly doesn't mean that their output is made weaker because of that. I mean, really, throughout the entirety of this record, you have so many great verses and choruses being delivered from a vocal standpoint, yet at the same time, it's the embracing of those industrial influences that you find throughout this record, a lot of more dark wave kind of sounds being put out through the album that makes it almost pastel goth in a way at times. Just from a sonic aesthetic, this album should feel way more confused than it actually is, but instead Radical Romantics manages to be the most impressive thing that Fever Ray has done since their self-titled debut roughly a decade and a half ago. Just absolutely fantastic, phenomenal album, and if you haven't heard this, then you should, get on that. 19. Kaliuchis, Red Moon in Venus. One of the most critically acclaimed soul albums of the entire year, and it's completely understandable as to why. I mean, Kaliuchis' vocals on here are just so perfect, easily, and in terms of full albums, at least, one of the best vocal performances of the entirety of 2023, even maybe top 5 or top 3 from that standpoint alone, but it certainly helps that the songwriting here is excellent, the instrumentals are very memorable, extremely lush, a lot of the actual compositions and arrangements here are outstanding. It's basically a perfect record in its own right. It's just a phenomenal Kaliuchis record, and it just goes to show why she is such a hugely highly regarded individual within R&B and soul music at the moment. 19. Bell Witch, The Future Shadow Part 1, The Clandestine Gate. The first part in what seems to be an upcoming series of albums from the ever great, phenomenal funeral doom metal band Bell Witch. The Clandestine Gate is just one song, and it's almost an hour and a half long, and I absolutely adore it. Virtually every single minute of that runtime is absolutely essential in developing the amazing arc that's being presented throughout that single track. I mean, it's just so much build-up and payoff back to back to back to back to back. It's a stunning song, and it really does feel like Bell Witch are becoming more grand than ever, but also more humongous than ever. I mean, really, as a band that has always been kind of prided on, being a very large band from a musical standpoint, it feels like they're only increasing in the monolithic nature of their music, and it's making them far and away one of the most impressive metal projects out there at the moment. 17. The Mountain Goats, Jenny from Thebes. There's a whole thing to dig into here. There's a whole bit of lore relating to the character of Jenny and the Mountain Goats as a band and their history of reusing certain characters from record to record that one needs to go into to kind of fully appreciate this, I would argue. I mean, obviously you can get into it in your own right, not having the context, but I would highly recommend walking into Jenny from Thebes, having listened to albums like All Hail West Texas, That being said, as someone who has done that, and as someone who is a major nerd for John Darnielle and Company's entire body of work, Jenny from Thebes is an amazing continuation of the story of Jenny, a character who has long been a fan favorite of the Mountain Goats fanbase. It's stunning. It's an amazing meditation on topics relating to directionlessness and pointlessness within life, as well as taking control of one's own destiny. I really love the melancholic and bittersweet will it, won't it kind of ending where, Jenny sort of rides off into the sunset, but also not really knowing what's going to happen to her. It kind of makes for this perfect semi-anticlimactic closing to an album that's basically entirely structured around forcing a sort of climactic and impressive life in a world of anticlimax, partly involving murder, but that's besides the point. It's a really great record. Check it out, please. 16. Demoniac, Nube Negra. This is one of the best metal bands on the planet, and so many metalheads are missing out on them because they're from Chile, and that's just an absolute tragedy. I mean, 2020's So It Goes is a very good record, but this year with Nube Negra, Demoniac just completely blew away the competition with one of the most vicious, visceral thrash albums you'll have heard in a long time, I guarantee you. It's just such an impressive record, especially from a vocal standpoint, just pure, raw, thrashed, guttural vocals that at the same time can manage to be weirdly accessible for some people who may not necessarily be into the heavier side of metal at large. I think you get my point. This is a damn good record and easily one of the best that thrash and metal in general have to offer for the entirety of 2023. 15. MS Paint, Post-American. When the term synth punk gets thrown around, generally speaking, the whole idea surrounding it is just punk, but you have like a synth player in there somewhere, and MS Paint just completely flipped that idea on its head by being predominantly based around synths, and very explosive synths at that, alongside some anthemic vocal work that just feels so powerful in the same way that a lot of great post-hardcore vocalists like Ian MacKaye, for example, have managed to achieve with bands like Fugazi. It just all works. It's so good. It's such an amazing record, and it's easily one of the most insanely impressive debut albums of 2023. I think that MS Paint are really going to go far. 14. Mitski. The land is inhospitable, and so are we. Despite the fact that she's been a bit of an indie cultural icon for years, I honestly think this is her best album so far. I mean, especially after the somewhat disappointing Laurel Hell, I think that this is a return to just how great she can be as a straightforward singer-songwriter, though it certainly helps that she changes up a lot here compared to some of her earlier works like Bury Me at Makeout Creek to really just sort of polish things up a bit. I mean, her songwriting here is amazingly tragic, especially on the major hit My Love All Mine. I also think that the sort of lush instrumentation on a lot of the tracks here, a lot of the heavy sweeping moments throughout a lot of it only add to that emotional turmoil and the effectiveness that it has on the listener, and her vocals are just great. And like I said, the songwriting here, easily some of the best you'll find on any record in 2023. Just phenomenal, and even somewhat unprecedented, considering Mitski hasn't been this good in a long time. In fact, she may have actually never been better than this. This is just amazing. 13. 100 Gex, 10,000 Gex. Every time they add to the number of Gex, it gets better. Everything just gets better. Dylan Brady and Laura Less as a duo are capable of so much creatively, and that is really highlighted on 10,000 Gex. I mean, the variety of genres that they bounce through, ranging from sort of alt/nu metal to more traditional pop at times, but still with a huge amount of hyper-pop influence, to sort of jaunty, almost like semi-comedic songs with Frog on the Floor, and ska punk with I Got My Tooth Removed, etc., etc. None of it should make sense, and in a way none of it does, but that's kind of the point. It's just pure abrasive creative talent and ability directly in your face as the listener, and you just kind of have to take punch after punch from them. And you know what? This is one great, colorful, rainbow-colored sonic assault, and I'm so okay with that. It is just an absolutely insane, ridiculous album, and also Dumbest Girl Alive is one of the best songs of the year, no question. So, 12. Lil Yachty, Let's Start Here. Well, I think that the album cover here is absolutely atrocious, and obviously AI art just is horrible on so many levels, I can't really deny the quality of the music within, and, it's a shame that this record has kind of gone under discussed since its initial shock to a lot of people when it dropped at the beginning of this year. I mean, for Yachty to go from a pretty widely hated rapper that seemed to be slowly falling off more and more every day, and, more and more at a rapid rate every day, if we're being totally honest, to just come out and make a Pink Floyd adjacent, huge, super impressive psychedelic album while still maintaining a lot of the heavily auto-tuned and distorted rap influences that made him him in the first place. It just is so out of pocket, and it's kind of amazing because of that. It's one of the most unexpectedly impressive and artistically shocking albums of the entire year, and I think that unfortunately that shock has now caused people to under-discuss it, under-analyze it a little bit, but I really think that there is a lot here, and if you haven't heard this album since it initially dropped at the beginning of the year, I implore you to please revisit it. It really is a fantastic listen. 11. Paranol, After the Magic. Paranol is one of the most heavily hyped up artists within shoegaze as an entire genre at the moment, and again, I mean, rightfully so. The dude's music is absolutely incredible, and that certainly is shown on After the Magic, a record that manages to simultaneously capture the essence of shoegaze, that huge, bittersweet, romantic melancholy, while still being something that's entirely its own within its creative space. I mean, this feels through and through Paranol, from the lyricism being at times deeply personal to a lot of the soundscapes here really breaking the mold of shoegaze and not really staying in a singular area, being extremely dynamic to the point of constantly changing throughout a singular song. It all just feels very magical, and despite the fact that this is after the magic, it feels like it takes place during the magic. 10. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, The Silver Chord, Extended Mix. Well, some people do understandably prefer the standard mix for the Silver Chord, as it's much shorter, much easier to digest, and just as effective in delivering an admiration for the many electronic influences that King Gizzard take up here. I personally prefer the extended mix, as it allows them to do exactly that, delivering a heartfelt tribute/love letter to a variety of electronic subgenres like acid techno, for example. But at the same time, I feel like it really allows King Giz to just jam and do their thing, and if they are one good thing, it is a damn jam band, and they prove that they are just as effective in the context of jamming across electronica as they are virtually any other genre of music. This band amazes me, if you couldn't tell. Yeah, it's just a really amazing record, and even when a song is exceeding 10, 15, 20 minutes, it never really feels like it gets old, and there are times where I'm even maybe wishing for a little bit more, even though that's completely an unreasonable ask from any band that's already doing multiple albums per year, one of which, in this case, this one being way too long for most normal people who approach albums regularly, but not me. I love the extended mix of the Silver Chord, and you can't stop me. 9. HMLTD, The Worm. Abstract fairy tale inspired glam rock wasn't on my bingo card of things that I would love in 2023, but I mean, hey, here we are. This record is extremely impressive from an artistic standpoint, vocally, just amazing work going on here. It feels wildly theatrical, but also campy in a way that is deeply endearing, and Lay Me Down is easily one of the most emotionally poignant songs that's come out through the entirety of this year. Add in some very strange, almost sci-fi influences to an otherwise fantasy world, and you have one of the most creatively ambitious and successful, might I add, albums of the entirety of 2023. 8. JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown, Scaring the Hose. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this one, just because I feel like most of what can be said about it has already been said, but yeah, far and away the most insanely impressive two-person collaboration throughout the entirety of this year. Peggy and Danny just have such chemistry together, the instrumentals are fantastic, and even some of the things that some people complained about, like the odd choices of mixing for Danny's voice throughout a lot of the different tracks here, I personally loved and felt only added to the pure, unadulterated chaos of this album, and add in some kind of strange off-the-wall references and instrumentals and samples from both sides of the collab here, and you have something that is simultaneously very much individual for both artists involved, yet at the same time a perfect fusion of their respective unique creative identities and sounds. Just a really phenomenal album. 7. The Here's Collective. We're Still Here. Everything great about power violence, grindcore, and adjacent genres within the sort of heavy punk / extreme metal, whatever you want to consider it, kind of spectrum, is found on this album. It is just so raw, so violent, so absolutely aggressive, and so unpredictable about what the next musical step is, with incredible vocal work that just feels so unrestrained, some insane instrumentals that just feel almost improvised, but not in a way that feels sloppy, just improvised in the way that you're baffled by how a human being can accurately recreate a piece of written music while also sounding as intense as this album often does. And that isn't even to mention some of the collaborators on this album. This is a who's who of some of the greats of indie and experimental music. I mean, you have everyone from Shirley Manson of Garbage fame, you have Melt Banana is on here, Frank Iero, you have The Body, you have Jeff Rickley of Thursday, so on and so forth. There is just so much to love about this album, and it is just such a mind-blowing record, and I'm so glad that I got the chance to hear this as many times as I did throughout the entirety of the year. It's just so good. 6. Model Actress, Dog's Body. Model Actress have been around for a while, but I think that most people assumed that we were never going to get a full-length LP from them ever. In fact, I think a lot of people thought that they had kind of silently broken up before Dog's Body came out earlier this year, and then, well, Dog's Body came out earlier this year. Just such a perfect industrial sort of post-punk kind of record. Everything here is just absolutely incredible. I mean, Cole Hayden's vocal work is just absolutely slathered in this raw, at times highly sexual energy, and the noise passages on tracks like Crossing Guard and Donkey Show and Mosquito, which make up one of the best 3-track runs of the entire year across any record, I would like to clarify, are just so intense and so relentless in how they don't necessarily care about how the listener reacts to it, as long as the band still gets some sort of reaction, and that's something that I just remain absolutely impressed by many months after first experiencing this record. It's just such a consistently tight, but yet at the same time completely loose record. It's oxymoronic, I know, but instrumentally it's perfected. It's just that from a performance standpoint, it's so nonchalant in how chaotic it is, and it's just stunning because of that. 5. Liturgy, 93696. If you want to talk about an impenetrable album for 2023, talk about Liturgy's 93696, their greatest artistic achievement by far at this point. I love how it embraces this entire concept of totalism and taking things as far as they can possibly go musically, and because of that you get a lot of really great atmospheric passages followed by these blasts of just walls of avant-garde black metal and noise and screams and just musical violence. It's just so destructive. It's almost like taking a classical sculpture and smashing it to pieces with a sledgehammer. It's beautiful, yet at the same time, it's a complete just annihilation of any sort of standards that there is within black metal at the moment. And because of that, it's one of my favorite metal albums of the year and of the past several years, absolutely. Speaking of impenetrable albums, 4. Sprain, The Lamb as Effigy. I don't even know what to consider this album, man. I mean, No Wave is what most people would deem it, but it feels like it goes well beyond that. It's just something else entirely, a wildly unique beast. It's this combination of noise rock and classical and jazz and beat poetry and even arguably metal in some spots, but at the same time, not really. It's such a disorienting, confused mess of an album, and it's the most beautiful, disorienting, confused mess that you will hear all year. It's just so relentless in everything that it tries to achieve, both in terms of traditional climaxes throughout a lot of the record to just pure, uncontrollable noise segments with nonsensical, cryptic poetry being almost at times screamed over those walls of noise, this sort of competition between the different band members to see who can be the most artistically destructive throughout the record. It's just arguably the most disturbing record from a sonic standpoint that you'll hear all year, and I mean that in a very good way. It's a shame that Sprain also broke up this year, so this will also be the last we hear of them, but hey, what we did get while they were around was more than impressive. 3. McKinley Dixon, Beloved Paradise Jazz. There's so much to dissect when it comes to this album, and to be totally honest, I don't have that vocabulary and the level of mental tools, so to speak, to be able to do that properly and to do this record justice, but I will say this. McKinley Dixon is one of the greatest rappers out there at the moment. His lyricism is absolutely stunning, and the way he can do casual storytelling and beautiful poetry-level songwriting in the same exact song, while also sort of melding the two together into this beautiful combination of accessibility and pure romanticism in a lot of his lyrics, while also discussing a lot of very heavy topics relating to things such as personal identity as well as culture. It's a record that's so incredibly just passionate. It's a passionate record. It's an impassioned record above all else. And that isn't to mention the instrumentals, which are absolutely amazing to boot. I mean, you have so many lush, powerful instrumentals going on here. You have great features from people like Guy Esquivara, among others. It's just, it's so good, man. It's so good. 2. Sufjan Stevens, Javelin. Now here's a record I can talk about a little bit more, though I will hold back on some of the more depressing details of the album's origin because I don't feel it's appropriate to, discuss some topics that are particularly heavy in such a short time frame without, taking the time to talk about them in a deeper and more serious manner, much in the same way that I just said about Beloved Paradise Jazz. But I will say this, Javelin is Sufjan Stevens' arguably most personal album to date, or at the very least tied with Carey and Lowell for that title. It's an album filled with gorgeous instrumentals, brutal songwriting that is simultaneously hopeless and hopeful. His voice is more gorgeous sounding than ever. Everything here is so perfect. And when he asks on this record if anyone will ever love him, it's such an emotionally destructive question, and honestly, this album has made me tear up pretty relentlessly throughout the year, I won't lie. And at number 1, my favorite album of the entirety of 2023, Jaimie Branch, Fly or Die, Fly or Die, Fly or Die, World War. This isn't an album that I saw being discussed a lot among the larger music community. Really, only in some jazz circles did I see this album getting brought up a fair amount, and honestly, that's one of the biggest tragedies of this year in terms of music fandom, because this is one of the most stunning and heart-wrenching swan songs from any artist I've ever heard. I mean, there have been a lot of tragic passings in music in the past couple of years, and of course the loss of any individual is a loss in general, but at the same time, Jaimie Branch's passing, at least for me, with my own personal connection to her music, felt a little bit different, It was a bit of a more emotionally heavy passing for, me personally, at least. I can, testify that, her passing was one of the biggest tragedies within music in recent years. And this being her final album of recorded music, now officially released posthumously, it's just so incredibly powerful to get to hear this record. It's an album that simultaneously acts as a goodbye from Jaimie Branch, one of the finest trumpeters of the modern age of jazz, but at the same time it also manages to act as this sort of message of hope, which you especially see on the track Take Over the World, almost as if she's sort of encouraging her peers and those of, future generations to kind of continue on with expressing themselves and doing so fearlessly in the same way that she continuously did during her tragically short life. And yeah, as a whole, this is my favorite jazz album of the year. This is my favorite jazz album in a long while, actually. And this is also just my favorite album in general of the year. I don't think any album has outright made me cry multiple times in the same way that this record has. At least not any albums I can think of from this year or the year prior. So yeah, that's without a doubt my number 1 album of 2023. Jaimie Branch with Fly or Die, Fly or Die, Fly or Die, World War. Now that being said, that is the end of my top 50 albums of 2023 video. I don't really like ending things off right there, so I'll take this time to say thank you for watching this if you made it this far, and thank you for supporting my channel, even if you have only started watching it now. Even if this is the first video you saw of me, I appreciate you even bothering to click on the thumbnail of my video. I had a really great year listening to music. I uploaded very inconsistently and didn't review as much stuff as I would have liked to, but the stuff I did finally get the chance to hear was just absolutely magical, and I got to hear some absolutely stunning records this year. I hope you did too. And if you didn't, then, you know, listen to more music, I guess. I suppose. Maybe. Anyways, thank you for watching. In all seriousness, though, thank you for watching my top 50 albums of 2023, and with that being said, I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in 2024.